right, welcome back to another episode of the How to Get a Job podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between a recruiter and a career coach. And to talk about this, I have somebody who does both, right? Wears both hats, and this is not very common. Someone that is a career transition coach and a resume writer, a resume whiz, but is also a director of recruiting and operations at Career Path Staffing. So I just want to welcome Kim to the podcast. Kim, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Kim, I'm super excited to just have this conversation because it's probably one of the most commonly asked questions that job seekers would ask. Like, they will go to recruiters expecting that they're going to get career coaching, and then they will go to career coaches expecting that they're going to do the job of a recruiter. So tell us a little bit more about you and kind of like the two hats that you wear, and then we can dive into this topic.
Yeah, of course. So there is a huge difference between a recruiter and a career coach, of course. Again, not very common to have both of those hats be worn at the same time. But a recruiter is sometimes somebody who is on the corporate side. And then also there are recruiters who are on the staffing side. So that would be a staffing company, sometimes a retained search firm, sometimes specialized search firms as well. And what they do would be to work with a company. Their end client would be an actual company or organization that they get a job rec from. And then they go out and find the right talent for that fit. So that would be what the recruiting side is. Now, on the career coaching side, a lot of that is geared towards branding and strategy and networking and just really seeing where the gaps lie. Most of the time, career coaches are working one-on-one with somebody as opposed to working with many candidates for one job role. So that's the main difference there.
I want us to, so if I'm listening to this, you talked about like in the recruiting, the companies like retain, like, what does that mean? Like if somebody's not in this industry and they don't understand the jargon, what is like, how does recruiting usually work? Like, why does a company go, like, I think about it from a job seeker. Somebody wants to ask me is like, there's so many job seekers out there. Why does a company pay a staffing agency to go find people when they can just post a job online and get hundreds of applications?
Sure, that's a great question and great point. So a lot of times a staffing agency will be something that is outsourced to as a last resort, sometimes not always the case. But if the company has internal recruiters that are maybe not able to fill the position, or maybe that company doesn't have the tools to find the right talent, in a lot of cases, searches are confidential. Maybe they are going to be posting a job soon, but they don't have that job posted and they need to outsource for that reason. So that would be one of the reasons to use a staffing agency. But many staffing agencies, they have specialized tools that they use to find talent pretty fast because that's in the best interest to try to fill that role as soon as possible.
I found, I don't share this a lot. Like, it's not something that's on my LinkedIn, but I actually worked at a staffing agency for 6 months before I kind of like went full into career coaching because I really kind of wanted to learn that aspect of it.
Mhm.
And what I realized, there's a couple of things. One, usually staffing agencies, recruiting agencies, staffing agencies niche down unless they're like the big ones like Randstad or like they have every department, but they niche down and they have a pipeline of candidates. And that ultimately leads to the speed of finding a candidate is worth it, is worth paying the fee to get some really good talent faster. And the second one is like, because a staffing agency being the middleman can go and get talent from other companies where maybe that would be looked frown upon if an internal recruiter was the one that's trying to take clients from the competition, or not clients, take talent from the competition. But if a staffing agency did it, it's free game because it's a staffing agency was hired to just find the best talent.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely agree with that. I've seen that happen a lot.
One thing you said is an internal recruiter. If I'm listening to this, right, and I just think recruiters are all the same, what is the difference between an internal recruiter and an external recruiter?
Yeah, so an internal recruiter would be an integral part of the company. So Oftentimes you'd have an HR manager, HR director, you'd have a couple of recruiters, or maybe somebody in talent acquisition. So they are a W-2 employee essentially at that company. Sometimes an internal recruiter can be somebody who is contracted. So that can be a temporary or attempt to hire position, but that person is contracted to that company. So they're internal to the company in the sense that they're working on those job recs that are not outsourced to third party agencies. So an external recruiter would be an third party recruiter. So that's outside of the company who works for somebody else and they're contracted on an as needed basis, or maybe it's a specialized role, confidential role, or something like that.
I've always found that an internal recruiter, usually they're salary employees and they might get a bonus. Well, an external recruiter is usually more paid like a salesperson. Like it's a lot of like they get paid by they might still have a salary. The salary might not be as high, but a lot of the money that a recruiter makes does come to the level of their performance, which it comes into placements, or if they're in the business development side, how many roles they can get their recruiters to go and fill, right? And what's interesting is that I think about it from an internal recruiter usually has it's like 50% recruiter, 50% like HR. They care about like the way that they represent the company. They're more softer, less aggressive. And I always think about the external recruiters like they're aggressive. They want their commission. They might be representing multiple companies. They're straight shooters. They're like as soon as they realize that you're not the right candidate for the role, they'll ghost you because they're moving on to the next role because that's their making right now. I've seen really, really good external recruiters who have great customer service because they understand that it's a relationship business. But especially when you're starting out, like a lot of people from my university, their first job out of college was external recruiting. It felt like it was like more of a sales role than it was an HR role.
Yeah, 100%. It is. And it's really because external recruiters, their quota is tied to, and their metrics are tied to placements. That's the driving point. That commission is the driving point. Now, if you are working with a specialized agency, that would be a different relationship, or maybe it's a retained search agency where they're not as focused on volume at that point. They're really focused on quality. Unfortunately, there's some recruiters out there who do ghost, but your number one goal is going to be to try to maintain that relationship, do some check-ins with that person, try to establish and maintain a relationship with a recruiter that is in your niche.
Yeah. When you say retain, how is that different? So like
Mhm.
a traditional, like the most common recruiting is a company has some vacant roles. Let's say, hey, I need to fill 10 software engineer roles, right? And they go hire an
Yep.
agency. And a lot of times, and again, correct me where I'm wrong, I've been out of the industry for a long time. An agency might have a list of pre-approved staffing agencies that they work with, maybe three, four, or maybe if they really like one, they'll have exclusivity. And they would say, here's the roles that I need to fill. The recruiters go find them, do first round of interviews, do some vetting, and then put them in front of the hiring manager. The hiring manager then hires who, or they choose who they want. And then the staffing agent gets a percentage of the salary or however that's negotiated. Anywhere it can be like 10, 15, 20%. I mean, that percentage can be obviously negotiated by the size of the company and how many roles and whatnot. That's usually how recruiting works. But you said retain, that's another side of recruiting. What is the difference when it's in a retaining model? And how does that matter? Why that should matter to a job seeker?
Yeah, great question. So, what you referred to just now is contingent recruiting. So it's contingent upon hire. So meaning that agency, they will do the search for free. And then if they get somebody hired, that at that point, that's when the client company or organization would pay that fee. So that fee is going to be whatever the previous agreed upon fee is. Usually it's 18% and above, but sometimes if it's volume, it could be lower. Sometimes it's flat fee. So on the retained search side, that's where a deposit is put down. There are a number of ways to do that and structure it. but a deposit is put down for a specific search. A lot of times those searches are confidential. Maybe it's a highly specific search that needs to be filled that's going to take a long time. And at that point, a recruiter is essentially assigned to that role. As far as the payment goes, that's really determined by the client company and the agency at that point. But it would be more so a deposit to start the process, and then they would square up on the back end, once that person is in the role or however long they expect that search to last.
And usually in the retain model, it's exclusivity, meaning that they're only working with that one recruiter with one company. And so that recruiter, because it's exclusivity, the recruiter can actually focus, put more attention to it because they know they're going to get paid regardless, or regardless when if they fill it. But like they're not competing against other agencies who are also recruiting for free, and it's whoever finds them gets paid ultimately.
Correct. Yeah, typically it is something that's exclusive on the retain side.
So how is this different now into the career coaching space? Like the recruiters are paid by the company, and how
Mhm.
is this different? Like what does the career coaches do, and then who pays for the career coaches, and how does that model usually then work?
Yep. So there are a couple different ways to engage with the career coach. The most common way would be one on one with a career coach. Some of them will do group sessions, but the individual who wants those services would pay for those services. The only difference would be if somebody is in an outplacement service, meaning, let's say, for instance, the company laid off 10,000 employees. Sometimes they'll do outplacement services for their employees where that person would get a resume package or 5 sessions or whatever the case over, say, 3, 6 months, a year, something to that effect. So, in that situation, the company would pay for those services, and it would be up to the job seeker and the individual job seeker to redeem those services. So, that would be the main difference there.
So does the recruiter do okay, a career coach will help usually, and again, depends on the career coach, depends if it's outplacement the company pays. But let's say that you work like when you work with clients in Resume Wiz,
Hmm.
how does that work,
Hmm.
right? And how is that different from how you would work with the clients if it was if you're wearing your recruiter hat on?
Yeah, so with the career coaching side, what I do is all one on one. Typically, what we do is focus on branding initially. So, just making sure the positioning of the resume is correct, making sure that the LinkedIn is optimized. That's our main focus initially. We do strategy calls together. We talk about how to edit the resume in some of the programs that I offer. It's more of an outsourced service where we do the work and the legwork for that person. On the recruiting side, I do work with candidates to try to fill roles that my clients have, but most of that is retain search. So we're focusing on retain search there. And some of those searches are pretty specific. So we would get the agreement in place with the client company and then go out and start the search after our intake and everything. Just we want to make sure that we're finding the right person. So we would talk to candidates and screen them. We do initial interviews and so forth.
In my experience, when a recruiter reaches out to someone, and this is more maybe not for the top level roles, but like let's say more for middle ground roles, a recruiter might help improve your resume, but they're not ultimately like doing the work that a career coach does, which is like, hey, let's build your LinkedIn profile, let's build out your positioning. They might try to get you ready for the interview with the hiring manager because obviously it's in their best interest to make sure that you get the job. But it's not like they're doing mock interviews with tons of roles like a career coach. Any other major difference that you think I'm missing when it comes to like what would a recruiter might do versus what a career coach will do?
Yeah, so a recruiter, whether mainly the third party recruiters, are going to give you insight into different changes that you would want to make on your resume. They don't typically do those changes for you as a rewrite, but they would give you some suggestions and pointers. Once that resume and those pointers are usually based on their intake call that they've had with the company as well. So just knowing what that person is looking for. Once the resume is sent over to that client company and somebody wants to interview that candidate, they would do a quick interview prep. Sometimes it's star questions, sometimes it's just, here's what to look out for in the interview. But a career coach, I would say there's a lot more detail to that process. It's a lot more hands on in many cases. Again, depends on the career coach that you're working with and the program that you're in. But that's more of a hands on approach. And from the very start, what we do is just identify some of those bottlenecks to diagnose some of those potential objections too. So you always want to address those, say in the messaging or say in the resume before they happen. So that in itself will increase the traction.
You've been in the recruiting industry for over 12 years now.
Mhm.
What do you think is the most important thing in 2026 to get someone for them to be able to get a job?
Two of the main things would be the positioning, how everything is positioned. So that's going to be the optimization of the resume in LinkedIn. And then the secondary thing would be focusing on networking. So the job market has changed significantly, even post COVID. And what we see a lot of right now is there are bots that are allowing people to mass apply. It's just really flooding the job search and flooding those application processes. So that in turn takes longer for recruiters to get through that pile of resumes and it prolongs a lot of job searches. So, one of the main things that you can do is network to stand out and find other ways to stand out in the job search so that you're not getting lost in that mix. So, those would be the two main things.
One thing you said was that you usually when you start working with clients, you start with LinkedIn and you do a lot of help them with positioning. What do you mean by that?
Mhm.
Is that so that the other recruiters that are using LinkedIn to find, like using Boolean search to find candidates, they're able to find them faster?
Yeah, so we want to make sure that we optimize for some of those scoring platforms out there and optimize for keywords. Basically, that whole process on LinkedIn and the resume as well, but specifically LinkedIn, we want to reverse engineer that process. Whatever those keywords are that are in the job descriptions, we want to make sure those are on somebody's LinkedIn profile and that it's optimized correctly because that's going to increase attraction. LinkedIn is very focused on keywords and things like that. So then, of course, we add in a networking piece and other ways to stand out strategically in the search.
Kim, if somebody listening to this want to learn more about your work and how you help people in the career coaching side or even the recruiter side, like as a career transition coach, can you tell us a little bit more about like the services that you provide and how can someone that wants to learn more can contact you?
Yeah, of course. So there are three main ways that I work with clients typically. So one is just on that initial branding piece. So focusing on the resume, cover letter, and LinkedIn, sometimes different variations of the resume. The other way would be more of a guided approach. So it's structured where we do focus on branding, but we focus on some of the other bottlenecks in the search and have an actual structure to follow for networking. We talk about how to edit the resume moving forward, just some things to look out for in the job search, different job search scams that come up. So it's really a comprehensive approach, but hands on. And then there's a third option where we actually will handle that job search for the job seeker. So what that would include would be branding. We also would focus on strategy and interview prep, offer negotiation, networking, and applications. So it's really that full service approach. So hands off.
That's awesome. And what's the best way to contact you or connect with you about this?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn pretty much all day, every day, answering questions. So that's a good place to find me. You could also send me an email. My email address is kimberly@resumewiz.org.
We'll put a link to your resume, not your resume, we'll put a link to your LinkedIn and also your email on the show notes. Kim, thank you
Sure.
so much for being part of the show.
Thank
And
you.
if you're watching this, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.